Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Automation Anywhere, and it's entitled How to Transform Your Customer's Experience. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guest, Lee Matthews, we hope we're going to spark your interest and engage you in the conversation, as well as provide some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the session, we'll be having a Q&A. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping with you. Remember, it's important to interact with us to maximise the benefit, and as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with the recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Lee or myself from time to time. Don't forget, we are having that Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so type your questions as we go along so you don't forget to ask them. If you're having issues with your headphone speakers or with the internet, please note that on the control panel you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. Or you can actually revert to your registration confirmation email, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes will be available there for you. Now, I know there's a lot of you that are used to asking questions via that Q&A button on the control panel, but just in case you haven't had a turn or haven't had a try, let's ask a question. Let's ask a test question. And so I'm going to ask a very complex question, as is my one. So what was Monday, the 11th of October called in New South Wales? Now, thank you, Martin. That was my term. Ange knows. Well done. So we've got a few people that have been watching the news and have been watching our premiere, New South Wales premiere, that is. So Reshma knows, Ben knows, Ang knows, Craig knows, Sylvester knows. Right, Scott knows. So yes, I'm going to say there's no prizes for your answers. It was called Freedom Day. So with that, I would like to introduce our guest speaker today, and it's Lee Matthews, Solution Architect at Automation Anywhere. But before I give the microphone to Lee, we've got a poll question. So yes, we're already going to make you work. So Jess, if you could launch the poll. How would you rate your current experience or knowledge of robotic process automation, or RPA? Yes, and we're damn good at it. I understand the technology well. I have a little knowledge. Robotic, what? Lee, what are you expecting to see? Don't look at the screen, just in case. We don't want you to give the answer away.
Sure. Look, I think the term is reasonably well known, and if you sort of take the key word there, automation, people have heard a lot about automation solutions, so I'm expecting most people to have a little knowledge, but not necessarily be experts.
Okay, so you have been looking at the screen. So with that, we'll close the poll and to share the results. And you are right, 68% said they have a little knowledge, 9% said I understand the technology well, and I love this.
Oh, interesting.
100% said robotic. What? So with that, Lee, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much and welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. So I'm Lee Matthews. My role at Automation Anywhere is to help people understand the capabilities of our platform and to show how that can be applied to solve problems in their businesses. I've been doing a lot of work lately with customer contact centers, and in today's presentation, I want to share with you what I have learned and how we're seeing automation is able to transform customer experiences for the better in the customer contact center. So in terms of our agenda, we'll start out by discussing some of the common challenges that we're seeing across customer contact centers and how automation can be applied to resolve those. I'll then explain a little bit more about what process automation software is and clarify some common terms. So it was interesting to see that feedback there. That'll help me sort of set the level at which I kind of explain things and that sort of thing. We'll then look at some examples of how process automation can apply to the customer contact center, followed by a demonstration of a few examples that I've put together. And then we'll talk about an approach we can use that will help you evaluate how process automation can benefit your specific organization. At the end, we'll have some time, hopefully, for questions and answers and some good discussion. But look, I'd like this session to be interactive. It's a good group. There's quite a few people on, which is great, but not so big. It's going to be difficult to handle questions along the way. So please, as Fiona said there, type in your questions and we will endeavour to answer some of those along the way if we can. So let's get started. Okay, I'll start, as I said, by highlighting what we've heard from our customers as the main challenges that they're facing in the customer contact centre. And hopefully these points resonate a little bit with yourselves. So firstly, no surprise, high volumes. They've always been a challenge in customer contact centres, but with COVID really disrupting buying patterns, this has become even more of a challenge. A lot of those inquiries that you would have seen resolved perhaps in store and that sort of thing are now moving to the customer contact centres. The whole process of managing businesses online and by delivery is really exacerbating these problems as well. And then you've got organisations like airlines and hotels who've just been overwhelmed by a constant cycle of bookings and cancellations with each lockdown. And hopefully with Freedom Day, we'll see many of those more around the country. There'll be a little less of that. But yeah, high volumes is a constant problem. Another factor is that the work involved in contact centres can often be very repetitive, and it often involves traversing many different systems. This can be particularly true for organisations that have grown through acquisitions, because each new company that you bring on tends to bring its own systems, its own databases, and to solve customers' problems, you've got to check multiple systems. And even in a well-structured organisation that's been through a process of digital transformation, you'll still have your front office systems, your back office systems, and other ones, your call centre systems, case management systems. So having to traverse all of these to solve problems slows down the agent and also can result in data entry errors. Now, customer contact centres are constantly challenged to meet KPIs. That's often how these are sort of management by KPI. And they often conflict in many cases, which can be really difficult to manage. So, as an example, how do you reduce average handling time while at the same time increasing customer satisfaction and net promoter scores? Your agents in the call centres are often stuck in the middle, being squeezed by these conflicting targets. So that can be quite unpleasant. And therefore, in an environment that's got high volumes, it's repetitive work, difficult KPIs to manage, it's not always great for employee satisfaction, despite that rewarding feeling you get of helping customers. And the result is that you can often see high turnover in call centres. And the final common challenge we're seeing is that with turnover comes the need to train up new employees. And when you need to traverse multiple systems, and often those systems can have complex interfaces, they're designed for experts in finance or designed for experts in warehousing or whatever the challenge may be, it's difficult for new agents to get up to speed. And often they've got to look at these different systems which are designed for different kind of experts. So they're trying to be all things to all people. It can take several months before these people get up to speed to really contribute to clearing call volumes and that sort of thing. So how can automation help? Well, in particular, the Automation Anywhere platform, I can speak to how we've seen some of the results here and how we can help you with these challenges. So firstly, by deploying what we call digital workers, and I'll clarify some of these terms in a moment, using digital workers to assist your human workers, you can increase their efficiency. This then in turn enables them to close cases faster, of course, and handle more volume. And we've seen up to about a 30% reduction in average handling times where our solution has been deployed. Now, in terms of that repetitive and boring work, that is the perfect work that digital workers like doing. It's structured, it's high volume, they work 24/7, they don't make mistakes within the parameters that you set up for them. So they can take care of the complexity of dealing with multiple systems. and all of those complex interfaces as well. So we've seen up to a 75% reduction in repetitive tasks when digital workers are deployed in the customer contact center. Now, because digital workers can make your human workers more efficient and less bogged down in this mundane work, they allow them to focus on the human touch. This tends to increase all of those key statistics there. So on top of the fact that customers, of course, get quicker responses with the agents being more efficient, you're able to improve all KPIs across the board: customer satisfaction, net promoter scores, along with things like average handling time and first call clearances. And of course, by enabling your employees to offload all of that boring work to their digital colleagues and to handle the volumes better, you're effectively enriching their jobs. So this leads to much happier employees and then potentially less turnover in the contact center. And of course, when you do need to bring additional people on, the automation capabilities that I'll show you in the demonstrations can eliminate the need to have to learn multiple different interfaces and complex systems. You present all of the data to the agent in one single form. You can allow them to enter all of the data into one single form. So you drastically reduce the time needed to get new staff up to speed. So let's see how all of that is possible. Before I get into talking about some of the examples, I wanted to talk about these terms around robotic process automation, and there's a number of terms here within that I'll sort of reference, which I want you all to understand the context of and what I'm talking about specifically, because they're often a little bit confused, I find, when people are throwing these terms around. So firstly, process automation itself is a technology which allows humans to configure software bots, not robots doing things like you would see in, say, a car manufacturing facility, as an example, but software bots that just process in the background on a computer. Now, these bots can emulate the way humans interact with computer systems. In terms of keying data into fields, in terms of clicking on buttons and all that sort of thing. So we can work through that user interface exactly the way that a human would using these bots. Additionally, if it's more efficient, we can go through what is called application programming interfaces, or APIs, to make the bots even more efficient at interacting with these systems. So they're very flexible in that sense. Now, you can run bots on your own computer. But more often they're run on dedicated computers in the background, what we call bot runners. So that's just a compute resource that's used to actually do the work. So just as you sit at a PC and do your work, our digital workers would sit at a PC and run bot logic on those machines. Which leads me to another term I wanted to explain. So in order to access these systems, your bot logic requires things like a network logon identity, a logon identity, a case management platform, a logon identity to the ERP if you have to get in there and search for invoices and that sort of thing. So these virtual identities that you create to allow them to access all of the different systems, we refer to them as digital workers. So a digital worker sits at a bot runner PC and can run bot logic. Now, the final couple of terms here is unattended and attended automation. So where a digital worker is just sitting on its own in the background, processing high volume transactions on their own without any human interaction, that's called unattended automation. Just one of those logic engines that chugs away in the background and does data entry on your behalf. But it's also possible for bots to interact with customer service agents to help them become more productive, and for agents to trigger the bot logic on demand when they want it to occur. So where a human gets involved in passing data to the automation or triggering the automation, that's called attended automation. So unattended, attended in those scenarios.
So Lee, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
And it's a term. What is hyper automation? Is it different from RPA? It sounds like it's on steroids.
Actually, that's quite a good description. Hyper automation, intelligent automation, robotic process automation, all of these terms, I guess, are sort of talking about the same thing, but Process automation and RPA, that's kind of the original mechanisms of automating systems and that sort of thing. Now, as new technologies like computer vision and machine learning have become available and become more common, we've been able to integrate those into process automation software to really expand the capabilities of what can be automated. Typical older-fashioned RPA required structured data. So you needed the computer logic to be able to have a set of data points that it could key into the relevant fields within a system. But quite often, what's the incoming thing to trigger a process is a PDF invoice or a PDF order or someone's request to return some product, whatever it may be. You need a way that bots can read those documents, and all of these technologies becoming integrated allow a lot smarter sort of automation. So you can read documents, you can infer the intent from text within a document or within an email. You can look at images and find out what's in those images and that sort of thing. That really expands the intelligence of these digital workers, I guess. So that's what's hyper automation. It's the use of these modern technologies along with more traditional process automation technologies.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's now talk about some of the automation use cases that we've seen across different customers. So I just explained about unattended and attended, two different categories of automation. So unattended, those engines that just chug away in the background; attended, where a human gets involved. I'm firstly going to talk about some unattended use cases. Now, we've actually been quite surprised at how much opportunity there still is to improve customer contact center operations with unattended automation. And the reason I say that is because most call center, or at least modern call center management, case management platforms now have some sort of automation built in. But what we're finding is that these capabilities are not anywhere rich enough to make a significant difference on the operations or to replace those mundane tasks. The reason is they can't reach out to automate other platforms and interact with other systems. Excuse me, they're typically just focused on automation around the case records themselves, auto closing, auto opening, things like that, escalations. So they can't reach out to other systems. So if after watching this presentation, you go back and you discuss what you saw with IT and they say, yeah, we've already got that, it's worth digging a little bit deeper and just finding out, okay, what capabilities around automation do you really have? And we can help you with the questions to ask if you need. So let's look at some of the examples. Now, this, I guess, speaks to a little bit about that hyper automation concept and intelligent automation. The ability for a bot to read incoming emails that are all just going into a great big pool in a single email box and redirect them out to the correct department or to the correct service queue. Typically, a human would need to read that email and understand, is this a complaint? Is this a request to return product? Is it, well, hopefully someone saying we're doing a fantastic job? Is it a spam email that's been generated? Bots can actually do that sort of thing now. You give them a bunch of emails to learn from, and then they can, based on the model that gets built there, a machine learning model, they can read those emails and understand exactly what that email is intended to do, and therefore send it to the right people. So this is a great part of automation that's expanding due to that intelligent automation concept. Also being able to send out standard responses for common problems and auto-close the cases. So an example there that came up with a customer who's shipping products all around the country, when people, no doubt, this happens a lot with the high volumes that our delivery mechanisms and networks have been handling, they're calling in saying, hey, where is my goods? I ordered it a week ago. If that was, say, an overseas shipment or something like that, well, it's kind of left our shores. We don't sort of necessarily have too much insight into that. So what they are able to do is automatically recognize that, this is an automatic shipment. It's left our shores. The standard response that we send out is contact your local delivery network to find out the status there, or to just send them the tracking number, for instance. So a human agent doesn't necessarily need to do that sort of work, but you need the smart automation to identify those scenarios and to be able to recognize that that's one of those scenarios where you can send out a standardized response. And another thing that happens is people send an email back saying, okay, thanks for your advice. Thanks for letting me know. Actually, we've received the goods. It turned up today. That email, when the case management platform is trying to be smart with its automation, can then trigger reopening of the case. How do you know to close it? Well, you've got to go back again and read that response to understand the context of the email that came back. So again, we can sort of understand that context from the text, from the brevity of the email. That's another good sign. And then we can close support cases that were reopened in error from an email response. Another big one that's come up is particular customers who are high volume customers. They want to get a summary of all of their cases from the past week. How many are open, how many were closed, and that sort of thing. Typically, one of the managers of the call center, a team manager, needs to sit down and produce these and send them out. But this is the perfect sort of thing you can do with automation. There's obviously flags in the system that identify who those customers are. We can loop through each one of those, generate the required report, email it out, and that's something that they no longer need to do on a ongoing basis. So there's some great use cases we've seen. I hope a few of those resonate with yourselves, and it gives a bit of an idea on the type of little engines that can run in the background, checking things and taking care of certain types of scenarios for you. Now let's look at more of the attended scenario where human workers get involved and are triggering bots and interacting with the digital workers. So human workers firstly need a way to interact with those digital workers. And in the Automation Anywhere platform, we do that through forms. These forms are very simple to build. They can be created to display whatever information is required for the particular type of case that you're handling. And this enables us to present the agent with a very clear, simple form for each customer support scenario. You can even build into those forms guidance to help them through recommendations, checkboxes that they must check before they can progress, all of that sort of thing that makes, I guess, builds in training to the process itself. Now, when they enter in data through these forms, we can then send that off to our digital colleagues and ask them to perform data entry tasks on our behalf. And this is really valuable in, say, complex systems like SAP, for example, where it takes a long time to train someone. You've got to navigate through these 5 forms and then get to this field here. And if it means this, you don't have to worry about that anymore in this scenario because you just present your agents with the simple forms. The digital worker handles all that complexity of those back-end systems. Another really big use case is where there's multiple systems you might need to update. Again, you collect all of the information in a single, easy-to-use form, and then once that's submitted, the digital worker in the background goes off, takes the relevant data that needs to be entered into each of those different systems, and again, handles all of that complexity. Now, another thing is where the agent would need to access multiple systems to retrieve information. So our digital workers can do that on their behalf. I'm sure in the contact center industry, you would have heard of this mythical 300-degree view of the customer that's often so hard to achieve. Well, where you have acquired multiple systems from different businesses, where you have different data in different systems, that can actually be achieved not through having to build all these integrations, but simply by having a digital worker go and fetch the data from the relevant systems and bring that back into a single consistent form that the agent is able to view. And finally, the next big benefit of having these digital assistants working with your agents is that they can take care of all of that after call work, the generating of reports and sending things off, printing to PDFs, sending emails with attachments, even making your call notes and that sort of thing. If that can be tracked along the way, they can then update the call notes within your CRM system or case management system. So all of these things can make your agents much more productive, allowing them to resolve cases faster, handle more calls, and to spend more time talking with the customer. So this leads to all the benefits that I talked about earlier. So let's see a bit of a demonstration. Now, what I'm going to do is jump out of the slides and I'll show you, because it's a bit easier to do it this way across multiple scenarios. I've got a video that I've recorded of some of the demonstrations I've put together. So let's jump into that one here. Now, the capabilities within the Automation Anywhere platform that I've been referring to are called Automation Anywhere Robotic Interfaces, or ARI for short. So using ARI, every human worker can have a digital assistant, and this enables you to transform your customer service operations as I suggested. So I'll just pause the video here as I sort of can talk through it. So as I mentioned, all those KPIs can be driven higher. This scenario involves, say, the accounts receivable team, a finance call center, or at least it's a finance-based question. So the team are receiving a call from Edge Communications. They've got their statement, they've got this charge on there, and they haven't got the invoice. They want a copy of that invoice so that they can approve this at their end and process this transaction. So our agent jumps into the web interface of ARI here. And as you can see, it's presented like a catalog of solutions that you can pick from. And each of these has a particular workflow, a set of forms. So our agent here clicks on the invoice request, types in some of the name of the customer to go and search for. And notice at this point, having clicked on submit, you can see the steps building up on the left-hand side in the form here. This is who's doing each particular part of this process. So in this case, I was the one who kicked off the request, typing in the search. Control has now passed to a digital colleague who's going and fetching all of that data for me in the background. And this can be where they're potentially pulling data from multiple systems to present it to me in a consistent form. And here we go. We have all of the information presented in a custom form that's built specifically for this particular problem solution scenario, this particular workflow. And notice here how you can build in controls. So these forms can be built however you want to present them, with whatever functionality you need. And you can build in things like these controls, so you're ensuring that correct process is being followed in identifying the customer. And again, you see these steps building up here. So our digital colleague fetches the invoices for that customer. Again, another custom form. We're able to select the particular invoices that we want to send out to them, type in an email if that's something you want to capture, or you can pick that from the existing systems for security. So, you know, it couldn't go to the wrong person. And you can see those set of steps building up further here. At that point in time, the job's done by the human worker. The job of preparing those invoices, printing them to PDF, wrapping them up in a zip file, attaching that to the email, sending that out to the customer, updating the call notes, all of that can be handled by the digital colleague in the background, and they're able to move on to solving a problem for the next customer. So you can see here's an example of an invoice that has been prepared, and there's the invoice that we requested. And notice how all of this is kept here for audit purposes, basically, to see who did what throughout that particular instance of the process. And you can come out here and see all of the processes that have, the instances of a process that have been kicked off. Now, it's also interesting to note that digital workers can reach out to human workers and say, hey, I need some assistance with this. So imagine you have a digital worker taking care of a bunch of calls, identifying scenarios where they can maybe auto close and send out a standardized response. But there's some within that category that might look a little bit unusual. Actually, a great example is a insurance company who automated the process of handling insurance claims for broken car windows, because it's relatively small value. It's a simple sort of process. But the bot is able to detect where things are over a certain value for a particular type of vehicle and go, that's a little bit unusual. I'm going to ask one of my human colleagues to get involved and assess this one. So here's an example of that, where in this scenario, the bot was going ahead, shipping some product, and it's encountered a particular order that has something that's out of stock. So it's easier for a human to get involved in this. They're asking one of the human colleagues to call the customer and help resolve that. So let's see how that would work. So our human worker can pick up one of these items from the queue, just as you would have an existing sort of case management platform, assign it to themselves, and get the customer on the phone. So again, a completely new form here built to present all of the information that's required for the agent to do their job. They can call the customer, have the order number, the purchase order if that was provided as well. The particular products here from the inventory system as to whether they're out of stock, along with the products attached to the order. And again, we're building up that set of steps, working through a process flow to resolve this particular problem. It's worth noting that each step there is completely independent, as the pop-up window was showing there. So if I needed to perhaps go, walk off and go and get some advice on this, or if I want to take my lunch break or my tea break, this will sit there because each particular step is run either by a human or by a bot, and it can pause at any point in this process. So that also allows you to process a certain set of steps in one team and then route it off to another team to do some of their work on it, and for it to then come back when that's been completed. So it's very, very detailed in terms of how you can solve these problems across different teams in the organization. So in this case, the customer has chosen, look, let's just cancel that item and ship the rest of them. So our digital colleague updates the backend systems once again. Now fetches the updated order, no doubt prints that to PDF, sends the updated copy to the customer, and we can then complete the, or mark the order as complete. And again, any after call work would be then handled by the digital worker. So there's an example of a couple of ways of triggering bots. The first where the human triggered it, the second where the bot reached out to the human. So if I come back to my presentation here, let me just quickly recap what you saw there. So a customer is able to call in and deal with the agent in that usual sort of human way. So you have that great person-to-person contact. The agent, through forms, is able to interact and ask the digital workers for help. The digital worker accesses all of those systems themselves and is able to update data sent by the agent, or send out emails and reports and documents direct to the customer to save the agent some time while they move on and assist the next customer.
So Lee, before you move on,
yes,
digital assistants seem to be running on their own computer. Can they actually run on the agent's computer instead?
Great question. So it can be deployed either way, and I guess that introduces another term that I didn't quite touch on at the start. I would call where the automation is actually running on your PC is desktop automation. So it's a slightly different category. It's a type of attended automation because obviously you as the human are triggering it and you're running that process on your desktop. It can run in the background for certain types of automation so it doesn't interrupt you, and then sort of pop up with some windows if necessary and say I'm done, or present you the information that was required. So both mechanisms are possible within the Automation Anywhere platform, and there will be certain scenarios where it's a little bit easier or makes a little bit more sense to actually run those automations on the user's PC because you have the ability to interact with them a little bit faster.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, so I showed there where through our web interface, a human user was triggering that automation process. There's multiple ways to actually trigger these. So you could have a bot sitting there looking at an email queue, looking for incoming emails, as I said, and then potentially routing those out to humans or opening cases, whatever might be the required outcome. You could have things on a timer or schedule, just sort of triggering every 10 minutes or maybe running at end of day or end of week to generate those reports that go out to particular customers, as I discussed earlier. Even within your CRM platform, you can have events in the user interface triggering things. So when a user saves a particular type of record, we can trigger some automation there. We also have the ability with common platforms like Salesforce, which is used very widely, to embed buttons in there. So you can generate those or trigger those automations yourself by clicking on a button in the Salesforce application. And of course, files, moving data around, checking for files in a folder is, again, one of the most common things to trigger bot logic. So before we get into a bit of a discussion, I just wanted to talk about some of the customer stories, customer success stories that we're approved to talk about. So here's a couple of great ones. At Bank Columbia, they deployed Automation Anywhere to every customer-facing employee, even in the branches. And this reduced times to respond to inquiries by up to 59%, and as a result, freed up 127,000 hours by moving that repetitive work off to digital workers. An incredible statistic not actually mentioned in this slide is the fact that they achieved 1,300% return on investment from their automation in the first year, which is huge. Now at Cons, which is a US-based home furniture and home products store, they were able to deploy up to 35 automations in 1 year. And as you saw there, you interact with, or one of the options for interacting with the system is through a web browser. It's predominantly a web-based system, so everyone's got a browser on their PC, so you don't need to roll out software to hundreds of users and worry about that. Basically, you just give them a URL and everyone can have access to the platform instantly. So that makes it very, very easy to deploy across an organization. Now, this allowed Cons to reduce average handling time by an average of 65%. Task Us, who are a business process outsourcer, they do things on behalf of other people. So as you can imagine, they have a lot of calls coming in to process those requests. Because of that web-based interface, they were able to empower 3,000 agents within 1 month of implementation. So as I mentioned, very easy to get out to a broad number of people very quickly. And they increased their capacity to process cases by 100%. So doubled effectively their workforce by adding digital workers to do work. And actually something, oh no, I did mention about the web-based aspect there. So yeah, let me move on. All right, so what next? How can you look at your organization and determine what are the potential benefits that we might get from automating some processes within our customer contact center? How could we transform our customers' experiences? Well, one of the approaches that we can use is what's called a process discovery event. This is only a couple of days sort of work on your behalf from people across the organization, but we run it over a couple of weeks and there's a number of steps. So firstly, we just identify, okay, who are the process experts in your organization? This is probably going to be some of the team leaders in different departments of the customer contact center. You might even look a little bit broadly at other areas like HR and finance and involve some of those people as well. We then run a session much like this one to talk about RPA, what it is, what the definitions are, what can bots do, how can it benefit your organization, and in particular, how to identify processes which can be automated, so good candidates for automation. Then we let those people go back into the organization, spend 1 or 2 weeks doing what they do best, but keeping all that knowledge in their head and looking out for those candidate processes that are good for automation. We give a template so you can record the details of those, and then we do a bit of analysis around that data. We might also talk to your IT people to understand the systems landscape, how we can integrate with things there. Also to understand the technology roadmap. There's no use sort of automating a platform that is going to be thrown out by IT in 3 months. And then finally, we sort of produce a report based on all of this analysis. Some of the data we might sort of validate just to check on the numbers, and we prioritize those opportunities based on the potential value that they'll return to the business, the potential value they will return to the employees. Now, that's a really big one because we want to see these outcomes really benefit the employees because it's a very human-driven process in the customer contact center. And that enables you to develop a pipeline of opportunities within the organization that can be used to justify a business case. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to present. Hopefully we can get some great questions and discussion going. So type in any questions you may have into the Q&A panel and hopefully I'll be able to answer.
I promise you, Lee, I won't ask you anything you don't know the answer to.
Well, I have an opinion on everything.
Well, we like that. So we do have some questions coming in, which is great. And the first question is, and it's probably more of an opinion piece, or you probably are better informed than that. The attendee wants to know whether the normal phone scheduled reports that most phone systems produce or allow. Would you consider that to be a form of automation or RPA, although it's quite basic?
Look, it kind of is. And let me just dry my nose a little bit. I've got a bit of hay fever at the moment. It's no coincidence that both the automation center of excellence in organizations tends to also be aligned or part of the business intelligence center of excellence, because data is a key input to automation processes. And while you could automate the generation of those reports, the reports themselves are more on that business intelligence reporting side of the coin. So they are almost like two pairs that go very well together. So automation is essentially doing things on behalf of humans, generating the reports and that sort of thing. That's automation. The reports themselves and the logic to do that, it's probably more a reporting BI function.
Okay, so I've got another question that's come in, which is great. And our attendee would like to know whether Automation Anywhere can integrate with any CRM, including custom built, and can it be built into live chat platforms? A bit of a double barrel in there.
Great question. Now, as I mentioned, we do have sort of pre-built automations for certain systems. We do have pre-built kind of assistants or plugins for things like Salesforce, so you can access those automations directly within your CRM or your call management platform. But and this is a bit of a misconception that some people have around automation, that you have to have some capability already pre-prepared in the platform. Modern automation platforms are designed to automate any system. They take the interface that's there and they recognize objects in that interface, text boxes, buttons, check boxes, drop-down lists, and they can perform actions on those. So applications basically fall into two categories, either a web-based or a Windows-based application. We can address both. We can also go direct to the APIs to talk to applications in the back end if necessary. And that's a much faster way of doing it, so it's sort of preferred if it's there. But essentially what that means is we can work with any system, any CRM system, and we can automate any system that we need to automate on behalf of the human user. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think the challenge is when you build something in-house, it's a little difficult for you to kind of estimate whether you can integrate cleanly, I guess, or easily. But you don't know unless you have a look.
Yeah, and even those in-house built systems, they might not be well documented. There'll be someone in the organization who's a bit of an expert, but it's still going to fall into one of those categories. It'll be a web-based interface, which we can recognize all the objects on the screen, or it will be a Windows-based interface where we can, again, recognize the objects on the form, or it will have an API we can talk to.
Yeah, fantastic. So another question that's come in is, what business areas do organizations tend to start with?
Yeah, look, the biggest one, the most common starting point, and the area where often there's the most low-hanging fruit is the finance area, because they handle all those high volume transaction levels. They work with a lot of business systems. There's a lot of data entry, a lot of reconciliations, all of these things that digital workers are good at. But the reason, another reason why that area has been a big focus is because traditionally a big focus of automation opportunities has been that unattended area, the engines that just chug away and do data entry in the background and match things up. But now that the capabilities of platforms are expanding, there's these really rich interfaces you can create to allow users to interact with digital workers, to have processes that go down different paths depending on the data and the choices that the user makes. The breadth of capabilities to automate across an organization is really, really wide. So customer contact center is another area where there's a lot of data entry, and this is why there's been a lot of growth in that area. HR is another big one, because you often have multiple people becoming involved there. You need to onboard new employees' data in your HR systems. You need to then get IT to set them up in the other systems and that sort of thing. You then need finance to also set them up for payroll details. So each of those processes can be automated as well and sort of combined to make sure that nothing falls through the gaps.
Yeah, and I would imagine if you automate, then it would be less prone to error, especially as you have, the HR process. In particular, you hear so many cases where they're set up in the HR system, but something's not quite right with their banking details or whatever it might be. So I guess, it's like having the agent that never sleeps, that never has a sick day, and you just coach and train it along the way in terms of what it is you want it to deliver.
And actually, that's a really good point you make there, because to touch on that turnover aspect, look, there'll always be turnover, and offboarding employees is a really important one, because they might be leaving with a little bit of an axe to grind or something like that, and making sure that you actually deactivate all of those systems and accesses, particularly when everyone's working on business systems from their home PC these days. So ensuring everything's captured there in the offboarding process is very important too.
Oh, absolutely. Compliance, risk, all of that, privacy in particular, is so important and so critical, as because we've opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, indeed. There's a question here. I'm not sure that I understand it. You probably will, Lee. How does that sound?
Sure.
What I should ask?
Hit me with it.
Okay. Our CRM has built in RPA. That's the bit I don't get. But can your platform work with that?
Yes, and that's one of the things I was talking about earlier with the automation that's often built into call management or CRM systems. I've done a lot of work with that in Salesforce. It's a common one that we encounter, and being able to use, one of the automation capabilities within Salesforce is called flows, where you can set certain events to occur when someone closes a case, for instance, or when someone reopens, or when someone changes a field value. So we can trigger automations in our platform based on those flows, or we can even update things to trigger the flows and that sort of thing. So it's very common that we'd work in conjunction with any other automation capabilities you've already got.
Right, fantastic. Now I do understand what you're talking about. So there you go. It's not a trick question. So what industries are best suited to automation? And I know the answer's all, but what way would you go? What would you suggest?
Ooh, and I'm probably going to disappoint you by saying all here, but it's hard to pick an industry. Interestingly, some industries are more advanced than others in that digital transformation journey. And by the term digital transformation, essentially, I mean, replacing all of these old systems that are difficult to work with to make it easier to reach out to your customers over multiple channels, including digital, to integrate them so that data is, not contained in silos. So a industry that's moved down that kind of process and is very mature in those systems, there'll still be automation opportunities. There's probably going to be less, though, than a particular industry that's been slow to move in that area. And RPA, process automation, it's one of those tools in your toolbox to enable you to embark on that digital transformation journey. And importantly, it means you don't have to holus bolus replace all of those systems to onboard completely new systems to make your organization more efficient. You can use the digital workers to still work with those legacy platforms that are often quite hard to get rid of, while presenting a nice, simple, structured set of interfaces for your users to work with.
Thank you. You touched on this during your presentation, but I think it's important that we go through this again. So what would you recommend as the first steps for someone who wants to introduce automation to a company?
Okay, so after this session, our people no doubt reach out and say, hope you enjoyed that. Was Lee a good presenter and that sort of thing? Did you learn anything? At that time, they'll ask, is there anywhere we can help you? Now, I imagine we've got a whole bunch of customer contact center experts on here, not process automation experts. So that's where it's easy to engage with us, to come in and do a little bit of analysis, to identify some of those opportunities and look at the systems that you work with through that process discovery event, or even a scaled down version of that. It's not a big interruption on people within the organisation to run a full process discovery. As I said, it only takes a couple of days, and we just sort of interview each of those particular process experts that you nominate. And we can make that, as big or small an event as possible. But focusing on just one process, generally that sort of doesn't justify the steps and the process to go through of implementing a process automation platform. And you'd never just do that anyway. So you want to build up a list of processes that show, wow, here's all of the value that we could achieve by embarking on this this journey. And it's not a big journey. You just do it in a series of little steps. You automate one process, you automate the next one, you might then expand that one, you automate the next one. It's very easy to do in these bite-sized pieces.
So what you're saying, Lee, is you wouldn't recommend going what I would call cray-cray by trying to automate everything all at once. Like, don't boil the ocean.
Exactly, yeah.
So would you suggest going through the process in automating maybe the most used process that you have, or would you pick a smaller process that will have, a lower impact on your customers in case you don't provide a great experience?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So you want to start with a process that is going to show the quick wins, the ability for automation to deliver big benefits to the organisation. So something that's got good volumes, that's going to save a lot of time, that's going to get some of those hated tasks off the back of your agents or your other workers. But in the same way, you want to do that in a way that's consumable by the organisation, bite-sized pieces. So as an example, that one I talked about earlier of being able to send out standardized responses to certain types of cases. We did that with an organisation, and they had about I think it was 15 different types of cases they could identify. But rather than try and do all 15 at once, the automation was built to do the first 5 and then to just let that bed in and then expand that to do the next 5 and so on.
Thanks, Lee. I guess one of the other questions is that contact centres are notorious, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, for working around some of the challenges where your systems don't actually talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. Do you suggest, or is part of what Automation Anywhere does, is help people to remove those workarounds, for want of a better term, so that it becomes a better process? Because as I look at it simplistically, automating a bad process is still a bad process.
Yes, yeah. That's a very good point. And sometimes, you're stuck with that process until they get rid of that, mainframe legacy system or something like that. Often that's the only place to go to get certain data to perform that customer identification step online. So yeah, sometimes you've got to stick with those things and just work with it. When looking at a particular process, you're right. If there's a better way it can be done, then we should probably automate the better way. And so there's a little bit of process re-engineering that goes along with each of those steps. And that's where it's really beneficial to do it in these bite-sized chunks. But you're right. Humans and our poor, unfortunate contact center agents are often used as the glue between these systems to solve these poor processes and that sort of thing. What automation is able to do is say, well, okay, let's use digital workers to be that glue and let the people do much more interesting work.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a question from someone who wants to get dirty with commercials. How does that sound, Lee? So the question is, and it's a multi-pronged question, if implementation is bite-sized, how do costs work? Is there a big upfront cost that is fixed so that you gain more through automating multiple processes, or are the costs structured per task so it makes no difference the schedule for adding processes. I love it.
Great question.
Into
now,
it.
we actually have some partners who are able to structure things in an outcome-based approach. So they run the software for you, they administer the platform for you, and they deliver a particular solution. And that means you pay for that, that outcome. So that's one way it can be done. The more traditional approach is to license the platform yourself. You can either run it on premise, but we have so many more customers these days moving to the cloud. We offer the solution through the cloud, and you'll remember I said it's 100% web-based, so it's very easy to do that. Our platform's been built specifically for the cloud, so with security in mind, so it's a very, very secure platform. But it's interesting to note that when things run, it's not running in the cloud. That's just the repository where you have all of your administration, your security controls, you set up your users, your bot logic sits there. When anything runs, that gets pushed down to one of those bot runner PCs that I talked about earlier, and they sit inside your organization. So that keeps things secure. None of the data needs to leave your organization. So the licensing involves an initial step to set up that control room, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud. And then you can just add additional capacity with each one of those digital workers. So there's particular packs that make it easy. I can't talk to actual numbers, but please have a chat about any specifics that you have with our people when they speak to you. But yeah, you're able to easily build things up in chunks. So you can automate one process, have a digital worker take care of that. More than likely, that digital worker is still going to have some capacity to do more transactions. It's only once they're working 24 hours a day that you need to add another digital worker on, and so on.
Fantastic. I cannot believe it, Lee, but we are almost at time. So
wow.
we really, yeah, I know, it didn't go fast. Fantastic information. I just would love to give you the opportunity to share some closing thoughts or remarks before we go on with our day.
Yeah, so my closing thought would be there's a lot of potential within your organization for automation. You may not have recognized it yet because you may not have thought about these sort of capabilities. We'd love to help you identify some of those opportunities. And it's easy to get started small and sort of build things up progressively as you go.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to everyone that joined us today. Thanks to you, Lee, for your generosity, and to the team at Automation Anywhere for being part of the Auscontact community. Have a wonderful rest of your day. If you're in a freedom state, yourselves out within the guidelines. If you're not, then our hearts are still going out to you every single day because we know how challenging it is. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.